Today, what I hope to do together is help us figure out how we kind of flip that old scenario that used to say that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people, and turn that on its head. And I had this crazy experience a number of years ago in ministry, and we had planted a church. We've been working along, and the church had grown. It was like kind of a mid-sized church by this point within our fellowship. And I decided, boy, we haven't done anything really to honor the people who are working in the church. We had all kinds of things going on, and we decided we would do some type of an event, a banquet, something to bless all the people who were serving in any role in the church. And I had never really stopped to see how many people we had involved. And what I realized was that almost everybody was doing something. And we had the people who weren't were either unable, we even had a guy with Down syndrome doing greeting. And we had people serving in roles that were like unusual and things. And so we had everybody doing it. The people who were physically unable to do something maybe weren't serving. And so it ended up being the kind of event where it was, okay, the elders and our wives, it was like, okay, we have to serve this whole thing because there's nobody else. If we want to bless them, it's the only way to do it. So we worked out, we had 95% of the people serving. 5% weren't. And it was, that's the adults, right, of all the adults in the church, which was crazy. And so we had to stop and think, what on earth happened? How did that take place as we grew the church and did all of that? And that's what I hope to share with you, some of the ideas and things that actually resulted in that, which we kind of did by accident. We didn't do it on purpose thinking, boy, we're going to get everybody and we're going to do this on purpose, but we were intentional about wanting everybody to serve, and we made it an expectation, but then it happened. And it's kind of like when you pray and you ask God for something and then he does it and you're surprised. That's kind of what happened to us, where we were surprised. So what I'd like to do is share with you some stories. If you have questions along the way, interrupt me, we'll talk, and we'll walk through this. I hope to just give you some ideas and creative things. There's not like a silver bullet for anything. But these are some good principles I think you'll learn today that if you apply them, you'll see some change in the context of all that's going on. So we'll start off with the how did we get to that place? And I would say the first thing that happened in all of it was a culture that had been created. And we look back, and I help church planters in the future, after seeing that, to try and create the same thing going forward, because it really worked. So we created a culture of involvement in the church. Just a sense where everyone was understood that this was part of being a part of this church. The way that we did that was, first off, was sharing, and these are important things, but sharing our history. It seems so, disconnected from actually serving in the church. But the more that you share the story of how your church formed, how it overcame the obstacles of the past and grew to the place where it is today and came to this new, fresh place where you are right now, that story is their story. And they've joined it along the way in different places. They may be joining it today, but it's now their history too, because they're a part of this new thing. And as they engage in it and understand the history, they become invested, in a sense. That investment is really, really valuable. So you will often hear me telling the fellowship story. When I'm in public, I tell it all the time. And Rick Buck said to me not long ago, we were talking about something, he said, I don't think anybody knows the fellowship history as well as you do. And he's like, I'm always wanting, and he says, I've learned so many things, and I'm trying to connect those things. And it's because I'm always telling it. And I do that on purpose because what it does is it helps Gravenhurst, who are new to our family, to understand what's the history, what's the story, how did the fellowship become what it is today, and now it's part of our story as Gravenhurst, right? And so now Calvary is part of that, and that journey with all of you as sister churches together are part of that. And in the local church, as members, when we get a glimpse of that, it's a really, really neat picture. I remember growing up in the church where I grew up, and part of our story was that two of our pastors had been, in the old days, the general secretary of the fellowship, which is code name for Steve Jones, the president of the fellowship. That's what it used to be called until they changed their structure, and it became the title, the position became president. Well, that was something that people looked at and went, wow, we're really involved in the fellowship. And so they engaged. It was interesting to me when they stopped telling those stories, the church became less and less engaged with the fellowship, less and less involved. And we have had to help them to re-engage over the last number of years, and they're more engaged again. But they lost it because they stopped telling the story. And so there was a real connection to that. So in the church, when you have a membership class, when you have an anniversary, when you have a special event that happens, you need to find as many times and as many places where you can rehearse parts of your history and your story, because it pulls the family together. And that's an important foundation for how your people will engage. If they're feeling like they're observers who come in, they observe, and they're not really part of the in-group, they're not going to be engaged the same. They may serve at something because you ask them to do something, but they don't really feel the sense of responsibility that comes with that if they're not a part. And sharing that history really does that. It's pretty neat to watch it unfold. You can see it right before your eyes actually happen. People get excited about, oh, I didn't know that. They hear those things, and it's really neat to see it happen. And so that's an important piece. The second one, so that's the first one here, is rehearsing your history and doing that. The second one is encouraging membership. Okay, membership's an important piece, and there's a lot of times in our churches with those of us who've been members for a long time, we just think, well, of course. But if we don't promote it as this is your next step of engagement in the church family, people will be loosely connected, uninvested at a whole lot of levels, and not really committed to serve because they're not taking ownership of that as well. There's also a whole bunch of other side benefits that can be disastrous if you don't value membership. We've had all kinds of stories over the years of churches who devalued or just didn't acknowledge membership as a valuable thing, and the church family grows, and then there's only a small number of members in a large church. The decision needs to be made, and these people are making the decision for these people, and often that goes sideways. And we've got some cautionary tales from the years, even in the last 16 years that I've been serving in the Feb Central office. There are a number of cautionary tales of churches that didn't value membership enough to promote it and encourage it. And sometimes even questioned, okay, because it's not openly talked about in the Bible as, they becoming a member, so we're not going to really do that. Well, okay, but you have to then acknowledge that you're putting yourself at peril, and they did. So encouraging membership, it builds that sense of ownership. Third thing that really primes and creates a culture that's primed for this is celebrating the common mission. Now, the common mission is critical, and like we all know that the Great Commission is for all of us. We know that when you read Matthew 28, and it says, that all authority is given in heaven and earth has been given to me, therefore go and make disciples. We know that that means all of us, but somehow on the day-to-day things, we think, well, that's the pastor's job, or that's the the director's job, or that's the deacons or the elders, they do that, or the leaders of this, they do that. And we relegate it to specific places rather than sharing the common role that we have in it together. So whatever role they're playing in the church, there's a piece of the mission that's being accomplished by them doing their job. So can somebody, as I talk about that, are you getting what I'm talking about when I talk about that? So what are some roles in the church that seem like maybe even obscure? What's an obscure role in the church that somebody might serve and that you need somebody to serve in? Greeting, okay. So how does greeting help us accomplish the mission of the church?
They're the first people that anybody comes into contact with.
Okay.
First impressions of the church, and in some cases of Christ.
Okay, yeah, exactly. And that's pretty important, isn't it? Yeah. What's another kind of obscure role in the church?
Building maintenance.
Yeah, okay. Building maintenance. How does building maintenance affect the mission?
Who wants to go to a rundown church? That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, they keep everything going so that you can use the rooms, you can use the building in comfort to share the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There have been moments when I really, really highly appreciated the janitor who restocked the toilet paper. And times when I really, really didn't appreciate the one who didn't.
Yeah.
Right? But just think about that. That's me. Think about it as a guest. Or the single mom who comes in with 3 kids, she goes into the bathroom and they're like crazy and there's not supplies there. Or the bathroom is set up beautifully, everything's working well, she feels honored, she feels blessed by all of that. So there are important pieces, and one of the things that happens is that in the church, when we talk about a role like building maintenance or greeting or other things, we just say we need, warm and welcoming people at the door. We don't tell them why. We need somebody to help us with, when we have, a rain downpour, somebody to make sure that it doesn't get flooded, somebody to do these things. Why? Why do we need those people? And what is the purpose? Because when I know that my job makes a difference, and maybe a difference in eternity for somebody, well, that changes the position altogether. And it's true. It's not an exaggeration for any role in the church. And so we need to connect the dots back, share the common mission, help people understand what they're in it for. And, it also is encouraging and exciting for people to get involved when they know that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And yeah, so that's a significant thing. Next, teaching people to invest financially together in the church. And as pastors, we struggle with talking about giving. Often as pastors, it feels self-serving because we are on staff. And we get paid by the church, and so we talk to people and we're like trying to teach them, but it's also a responsibility that the pastor has to disciple people to how to give and how to be sacrificial in their giving and do that. And yet the pastor's like, how do I do this? And so it's important for us as leaders to understand that the responsibility of discipleship is all-encompassing. And the reason that I put giving in the list is that when people give to something, they're invested. And they will serve. And it changes things. It just changes things significantly. And so there are a lot of ways that you can create those things in your system. One of the ways that worked really, really well for me over the years has been to always make sure that there is a good membership class at the front end. And we would have it would be over, we would really do 5 sessions. And as the senior pastor, I always owned it. Because that was the one touch point where I could have connection with new people who were coming in, and they would feel like they really got to know me. Because as the church was growing, there's a very real probability that you're not going to know them all well. But that was the one touch point where they could feel like they got to know me, the connection with the church was deepened, and then, the relationship's going to change after that, but there's this beginning point, and it was really helpful. And teaching the normalcy of these things, that it's just normal, our history, this is who we are as a family. That membership is something that we all do, and we're all a part of this together. That our mission is the same no matter what role you're in. Whether you're working in the nursery and I changed diapers and the kids screamed the whole time. And I came in with a headache this morning, and now, and I took both Tylenol and ibuprofen, and I still, the headache's worse. But it's kingdom mission. Because that single mom who dropped off her kids heard the gospel, and her life was transformed. And it's the beginning of a family that now is going to embrace the gospel for generations, possibly. There's things that are, the spin-off is massive. And so teaching those things as a pastor, building relationship, connecting that, I think, is a critical piece too. But those are just important pieces that come along with it. The next piece that as I looked at it and thought, well, how did we really get the people there was this. And that was helping people discern their unique fit. We had lots of people coming to the church, and it's like, well, how do we know what people's gifts, their experience, their education, they're really fit for who could do what? Sometimes people don't even tell you. I've been in churches where there's not a single musician in the church, not one. And they're using CDs on, and trying to find the spot on a CD to play the right song to go with the worship. And I've been in churches where there are people with master's degrees in music who actually have nowhere to serve because there's so many musicians. That's the crazy and that's in our churches. And week to week, that's what you experience. It's crazy. And so we have people who have all kinds of gifts, all kinds of abilities. How do we discern them? How do we figure that out? In the Bible, as you track through, and you look at Romans chapter 12, it gives you a list of spiritual gifts. In verses 6 to 8, there's a list there. You go into 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and again, there's another list in chapter 12, verses 4 to 11, and then in 28, again, talks about spiritual gifts. And then in Ephesians chapter 4, it talks about pastors and elders, and that whole passage on the APES thing, that it's there. And so we have these gifts, and we see them, but then we see different things happen as you read through the Bible about spiritual empowerment for special things. You look through the Old Testament, and how was the instruments, all the things that were used in the tabernacle, how were they made? They were made by God's people who were specially empowered to do creative things with their hands. It was a gift of the Holy Spirit who empowered them to do something specific. The temple was built the same way. So I think what we've learned, and the reason that the gift lists are a little bit different in every place you go in the Bible, is that there are way more than that. These ones are specific ones that were needed to be talked about in those specific passages, but there are more gifts than that. And so we have to understand the dynamic of giftedness, and how then do we, do we discern these things? There's, if you want just the basic gift sets that are listed in Romans and 1 Corinthians, there's a free gift test that you can help people to do. Actually, gifttest.com. You can go there. You can do that for free with people. You don't have to buy stuff. You can do it simply with them. You can sit down with them and do it together with them, and see what's there, and then talk about it and say, what do you think? Is that accurate, or is it not accurate? Are they crazy? And you can navigate that together and see what is there. One of the things, and I think that that's helpful, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. So the conversation about spiritual gifts is only one small piece, because serving in the church is way more than that. Whether, if you have the gift of teaching, or you have, the gift of helps, or something like that, you look at it and you say, okay, what else am I doing in order to accomplish this? And there can be a long list of things that you are also doing that allow you to accomplish that. And those things came in different ways into your life. And understanding that helps you to discern your fit within the bigger context. So here's some things that I have done over the years. I use every type of personality profile I can ever get my hands on. I use them all. So whether it's DISCs or StrengthsFinder or Grit Berkman or Myers-Briggs or whatever it is, I apply it. And so in my early years in ministry, I actually had a system where I helped people. We went through a simple spiritual gifts inventory, like that one, very, very similar to the one on gift tests. And then we did a personality profile, because there was a freebie on a website called humanmetrics.com, and it's still there. But it's basically a Myers-Briggs. They call it the Jung Typology Test. It's a version of the Myers-Briggs. And it just gives you personality profile, and does a big portion of it for free. You don't have to do anything. You can walk through it with people. Helps them understand how they're uniquely wired in their personality, how they relate to other people, and the things, the tendencies and things. And what I found with them is people look at it and they go, yeah, that's me. Or, oh no, I kind of think I'm more like this. And you can open up the conversation with them about it. And it helps them to see where they might fit or might not fit. And because you put the person in the wrong spot, and you're asking for trouble. It's just not going to work. So figure it out together. So personality profiles, anything that's out there, I would try it. That's my practice. It's always to do that. I came across another one the other day that I just heard about, haven't tried yet. What was it called? Something Genius. I can't remember now, but I just heard about it. So anyway.
Working Genius?
Yeah, Working Genius. Yeah, and I'm going to try it. Because why not? There's all of those things. The more we understand about ourselves, the more effective we will be no matter what we're doing, whether it's at work or in ministry or at home or in our relationships. Those things are important. So I included the spiritual gifts inventory and a personality profile in a system that I did for our people. So when they took our membership class, I said, the next thing that we'll do after this, and you're all invited to do this, in order to be a part of our family, it's important to know how we're wired. And so please take this class with us. And so it was kind of the next thing that they could do. They didn't have to, but I invited them in. And almost everybody did. And so this is what moved us forward. So spiritual gifts, then personality profile. The next thing we did was a decadal timeline. This is gold. It's the simplest thing to do, but it can be emotionally powerful and a a very significant moment for you to minister to the lives of the people that you're serving. So a decadal timeline, if you've never done one, it's basically this. You take a piece of paper and you map it out with columns of the decades of your life. So if you're only 20, or it's only got 2 or 2.5 or whatever. But if you're older, you've got a whole lot more. And you write out on the other side, you put the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you put them through. You map out the major points in your life history on this timeline. It's powerful when you start to see it on paper and you see the times of celebration and the times of pain, the times that were devastating and the times that were overwhelmingly joyful, and you see this journey. So I had this lady in my church, and she was a fairly new believer by the time she took this class. She'd been a believer for maybe 3 years by this point. And she said to me the one day, well, I can't serve in the church. I have nothing to give. I don't have any gifts. I said, Sue, really? And she said, no, I just don't have anything. Now, she was a high-level hospital administrator, and she's like, I have nothing to offer. No ability. I'm like, okay, somebody thinks you do. But she had so processed in her mind that to serve in the church meant she was going to be upfront and teaching in some way that was not her personality or fit, that she looked at it and went, I'm not a singer, I don't play an instrument, I'm not a teacher, so I have nothing to give. I sat with her after we had done the spiritual gifts inventory, we had done the personality profile, and we had done the decadal timeline. And she began to weep. She realized that the pain which had been her time, she was about 60 years old. And she looked at her life timeline and she was devastated by it, but also overwhelmed with joy. Because we lived in a place where, and we're serving in a place where there was a lot of brokenness and pain. And just a lot. We're in a rough part of the city, and there was a lot of people coming to us who they needed help. They needed someone who understood. And she realized for the first time that God was going to redeem that pain by allowing her to be there and understand the people who were hurting around her, and that for the first time in her life, these things were going to produce something good. And they did. And it was just an amazing thing, but she would never have seen it if we hadn't sat down and walked through it. And it just all of a sudden came to light. And she became a different woman in the church altogether. It was beautiful. So the decadal timeline is a good thing. You don't leave it sitting alone, though. As a leader, these are the kinds of things that are they are the pastoral moments where you sit and you care for the hurts and the pains and the walk through the joys and see how God has been at work in their life when they didn't even realize it, and you walk with them through it, and it's beautiful. But that's where that comes from. So it was the only people who did the full after teaching meetings with these people were me and the elders and our wives. We did that because I trained everybody to how to look at this and how to walk through this with people, because I didn't want somebody to trample roughshod over someone's hurt and pain and their experience of life and how that was coming together. The last piece of that fits into it and is a part of that is their education and experience. People come to us with degrees and all kinds of training and other things. You look at it and you think, okay, it's not related to ministry in any way, But when you put it in the context of all that's going on here, and you put that into the context of where God has placed you in the church, and where the geography of where you are as well, there's often a correlation that's really, really cool. And it starts to unfold. So you look at it and you see, okay, well, what was their high school? What was their college? What was their university or Bible college or seminary or other things they might have? Because some people do. They come to us with that already. If they went to graduate school, did they do that? Those things are all a piece of it. There's also, what was mostly my experience was not that. We're in a very blue-collar town. I grew up in a blue-collar family. And it's just amazes me that I served where I served because, you know, I was the first person in my family to get a degree, my whole family, and you know, and then the first person to get a master's degree, the first, you know, all of that stuff. It's just like what, just so unusual because, you know, I thought after high school I would be a mechanic, and I was, and I did, and so that was my thing. But then God called me into ministry. So you look at it, and the town where we were serving was largely the people I was before. They're just regular blue-collar people, and serving in that. And you look at it and you say, well, how do those things serve the bride of Christ? And there are beautiful overlaps. There are beautiful ways that happens. And it just, when you put all of this together and you work it out, that just to see the joy and the excitement in people's lives as they navigate those things together, it's pretty neat. Their passions and their the things in their life that bring them joy are also a significant part of this. So I'm an eclectic person. I love a lot of different things, and I like to do all kinds of things. I used to ski all the time. I used to race motorcycles. I love to hunt. I love to fish. I love to play golf. I'm like all over the map, but I can't do them all. But I love all those things. And they all play a part in making me who I am, but also in helping me to be able to relate with other people. And so the things that I'm passionate about, the fact that I love cars, and you know, I get excited about all kinds of different things about cars. That stuff has made me able to relate with some guys at a different level than I would be able to if that wasn't a joy and a passion in my life. And God has used it over the years. I remember in the first church where I pastored, I didn't even understand how that was all happening. But I had pastors from other churches coming to me and saying, Tom, how do you get so many men in your church? And I was like, we have a lot of men? I look around and realize we have a lot of men. And you know, I didn't even realize what I was doing. But I was just being me. And you know, doing the things that I love to do with them. And they all wanted to come and be a part. And they were bringing their friends, and things were happening around that. When you serve in your passions and you use them connected to your ministry, everything changes. And it's really neat. Fun story. We were doing this, and I was trying to lean into the things that I really love to do. And so we had a target shooting day. Okay, so I know some people don't like guns. Sorry, I love guns. But we had a target shooting day. And our church at the time was about 250 people. And this was supposed to be a men's day where we were going to go out and we were going to shoot guns. And so with the church being 250 people, you had to be over 18 to come to this thing. You would think if all the men came, might be 75, 80 people, you know, because there's a lot of kids, and that would be huge. 250 men showed up at that event because everybody wanted to do it. And there was this, we had a sign out to direct people into where we were. We had cars stopping, these like 18, 19-year-old guys saying, can we come? I've never shot a gun before. Could we, where do we pay? Could we do that? It was crazy. but it's just using the joy that you have, the things that bring you joy in your life. And all of a sudden, what we ended up seeing happen was not an event that brought a lot of people, but a whole bunch of guys that had no place to serve started serving. Guys that were, working in the factory, maybe down at Nanticoke or somewhere on Lake Erie, they're working at a factory down there. And next thing you know, they're teaching somebody something in the church, building a relationship that draws them in, and those people are coming to Christ. And it was amazing to see how they're using their normal, natural things to engage and connect in the church. So there are a lot of things that bring you joy or that are passions in your life. My mother loves to knit, and she is going to be 92 on July 1st, and she still loves to knit. She knit 100 pair of socks last year. Yeah, that's my mom. And if you got to know her very much, you would have a pair of socks. And you would thank her for them because they're awesome. But that's my mom. Well, the number of times everywhere she has lived, she ends up with a knitting group. A bunch of ladies from the community who love to knit, they all come over to her house and sit and knit. And most often they're people who are neighbors and others who don't know Jesus. And my mom is pretty neat that way. She'll just engage them, and it's just really cool to see her begin a discipleship journey with a pair of knitting needles. And so it can be anything at all, and unusual things at times. So putting it all together in a synthesis is the important part in that. You have all of these pieces, and they're good. And yeah, I mean, in and of themselves, each one of them has impact, but when you put it all together, and you sit down and you walk a person through all of those pieces, it's very, very cool. So do we have a question? I'm going to just kind of back it up and open up now and see what question we have. One here.
I was just wondering, especially about the timeline. Is that the kind of thing where you would always look it over just one-on-one with the person? Or like, let's say a small group all did something like that. Would that be the kind of thing that would be impactful for them to share with each other? Or?
I have found that the timelines are intensely personal.
Yeah.
And that it's better that as a leader you sit down with them. One-on-one or maybe with two leaders, but in that where they feel safe.
Yeah.
A person can say, oh, I'm okay with it, and then realize that they actually weren't ready to share that publicly yet. Because a lot of times it will include abuse or other things, I had a woman share too early one time publicly. Now this wasn't with me leading, this was with someone else, but it was in our church, about an abortion that she had had. And I mean, she was a great godly young lady, but she had had this abortion, and when she shared it publicly, she couldn't pull it back, and she wasn't ready, and it was devastating for her, and it took her about a year to get back to where she was. And she was able, by God's grace, to get strong through all of that and deal with it, but she wasn't ready. So one-on-one, she could have done that.
Right.
Would have been fine. Yeah. Because you don't understand the context, right? You're in a room with a whole bunch of people. I mean, I had it happen to me in a graduate school class in Chicago. I'm sitting there, and I was asked about a particular situation, and I shared something. And I had some pastor from the southern states attack me in the class because of the decision that I had to make in this, and I had no choice. And it was terrible. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And I was in pain, and I got attacked. It's like, okay, you know what?
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't want to see that happen to anybody, that kind of pain. Okay, any other questions?
How do you, in the teaching to invest together, how do you combat the flip side where people will say the reason I'm giving is so that someone else will do the work?
Yeah, I mean, that's simple. And because, you know, the scripture tells us that God gave gifts, he gave pastors and teachers, all of those, to train people to do the work of the ministry. You're not the paid professional. You're there to equip them to do the job. And so it's pretty clear. And yet I've had people say that to me. And it's, you know, it's sad because they don't understand their own role and the things. But that would be the easy way of saying it, but it's a hard conversation if somebody's hardened to that place. But it is the gist of where you have to go. And then talk about what it means to be a body and part of the family. Like the hand doesn't pay the eye to do its work, right? And if it's a body, each part has to do its work or it doesn't function properly. So there's a lot of pieces and angles, but it does come up. Yeah. Somebody else.
You mentioned a couple times that when you're doing something, you get your elders and their wives to be involved.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that effect and why that's valuable?
Yeah. Well, often people have experienced, especially when we're doing this kind of thing and we're getting in personal stuff like this, people have experienced all kinds of things, whether it's trauma or other things that are in their past. There are many times, particularly with women, it's better to have a woman helping to navigate that conversation, whether it's just her and the other woman, or whether it's the elder and his wife, and the wife kind of takes lead in that, and he just sits back. It's important. I heard of a scenario recently where a woman was asked to sit in front of the elders and answer some questions. Well, she had experienced some very extreme trauma at the hands of a man. And so it was, to her, it was devastating.
Sure.
And the guys didn't mean it that way. They weren't trying to do anything terrible, and they just didn't understand. And so I think we need to be very sensitive to those things in a very real way. I don't, you know, there's just so much to the pain and hurt that we've experienced, and it can be anything, right? And we just have to be sensitive to that. So that's why that's why we did it. It was just trying to engage that at that level. Plus the other side, that often, you know, having a very intensely personal conversation one-on-one, for me with a woman is not, I don't think that's appropriate. I think that if you're gonna get into that intimate of a conversation, I need Tammy beside me, or Tammy needs to do it at that level, because, you know, it gets sometimes very intense, and, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of things that can, you know, unintentional weirdness that can happen as a result, right? That's the official term. Yeah. So.
Well, I had a mentor that had his own business, and he would never hire anyone until he took that person out for supper with his wife, because he said, my wife can pick up on things that I never would.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of that too.
Wise, very wise, yeah.
I was just gonna go back to the teaching to invest together.
Mm-hmm.
Our church, because we had to make it normal to talk about, because we're building a new building, soon, and it will soon be in it. But it became something that became a normal conversation in our church for fundraising for the building and stuff. And something we incorporated, which I thought has also stirred like people becoming volunteers and serving together, is that we would talk about, when we prayed for offering, we would talk about what we're doing with the offering. And then And then also it could be a ministry focus, so we would
Yeah.
say, this is what we're doing, and we'd love you to come alongside and join us.
That
So it
is
became
cool.
more normal in our
Yeah.
church to talk about it, which was actually really healthy for other people getting involved.
Yeah, that's gold. That's the kind of stuff that we need to be doing. The world has so messed up these things, and that you can't ask for money without people being suspect in the worldly context, and so we need to teach them, because we need to give back to the Lord. He's blessed us, and the tithe is a responsibility that we all have, and I mean in this room we all do it, but if we don't teach other people how to do it in a healthy, good way, boy, we're going to suffer, and they're going to suffer actually and lack the blessing of it, because it is a huge blessing. So, yeah.
I know more than a few church leaders that are against spiritual gift tests, APEST tests, and certain personality profiles.
Sure.
Have you heard any pushback from them?
I mean, there's a few things. I mean that people can get wound up about. I don't take them that seriously. The tests and those things. The Bible clearly teaches that there are spiritual gifts, and logically, then we have a responsibility to try and figure out what it is in our own lives and how we fit. So, if a tool helps me to do that, then I'm going to use the tool to do that. Am I going to take it as God's word in my life? No, the tool is not that. But the tool, coupled with a variety of things, is what helps me to discern that. And the variety of things that I would look to are, one, God's people, because God's people always confirm calling in our lives, right? And the giftedness, and that's a biblical principle that the church looks and then sets apart, like Paul and Barnabas. They saw them, they set apart them for the ministry, the work that they were called to. The other thing is then, others looking and just confirming that the giftedness is real. I remember growing up there was this young guy. Well, he was a couple years older than me, but we were young at the time, and I remember my parents were giving him a ride home from church one day, and my dad said, "So, Dad, what do you want to do when you grow up?" Because he was a teenager at the time, and he had a list of things that he wanted to do. He wanted to be either a pastor, he said, "I want to be a preacher, not a pastor, a preacher, or a radio announcer, or a talk show host. But talk like this." It was brutal. You call this not what we did. It was like, okay. Now, did he have the gifts to do it? Well, he had something in the way that was pretty huge. And somebody had to finally say to him, "People can't understand what you're saying. If that's a path you want to take, speech therapy, there was a list of things that had to happen before he could ever get there." And yet, sometimes we come to something and, we go through the list, like you can go through a list on a test like that, and they don't know if you have a speaking gift. They know that people have, you maybe spoken in a couple of contexts, and people have heard you, but they don't know, right? And so that's the thing. So the tests, don't take them too seriously, but I would say use them.
One of the tests that I found very helpful is the 5 love languages.
Oh, yeah.
And I most likely will take our volunteers through that, because once you understand someone's love language and you speak into it, you get a lot better response, a lot better connection with them.
Sure. Yeah, the good tools, again, they're not the be-all and end-all, but they give us little insights. And when you put that together with a whole bunch of other things that you're always tapping on and looking for, you start to see things that, okay, this is how this person is wired, so they probably fit in this type of a ministry. Yeah, so Someone else. I don't know what time I'm supposed to end.
3:15.
By 3:15.
Oh, okay, good. We've got a few minutes left. So, we're good. Okay. Other questions? Okay. So, yeah, so those are some of the things there. For me, one of the things that I have found incredibly valuable after, we do all of these things and engage in this, is to then take this and communicate the greater purpose of every role. So, like if you were to work on our team at Feb Central, you would have a job description. And your job description will begin with a statement of how you are advancing the cause of Christ through Feb Central. And then it would outline what it is that the impact of the role will have to God's kingdom through Feb Central. And that, to me, I've changed it so that every job description, if you talk to anybody who's on our team, they all have a job description, and it all starts that way. Because I want them to see how, when Tammy's doing accounts, and she's doing the receipts at the end of the year and those kinds of things, how that impacts God's kingdom by what she does, because it changes the motivation for what she does. I want every person to see that. We started to do that in our church with all of the main roles in the church, and so that everybody who was, whether they're the director of children's ministry or the director of our youth thing or the building and grounds start to see, this is, we're advancing the mission of Jesus in our city through this local church by ensuring that the facility is clean and well cared for, so that all obstacles are removed from people's path to the gospel. And so they start to see how they're clearing the way for people, and their job takes on a whole new role. So when they pick up the garbage or the other things that are happening, when they have to clean up after Roy, Roy was an interesting character. He would come to church, and he would try and bum cigarettes from the people who were coming to church, and he never got any, but he never stopped. And then he would go across the road and get some cigarettes from somebody. And he'd stand outside the doors of the church and smoke, and then leave the butts all over the place. And anyway, Roy was quite a character. Published author, it was a poet, and I'm like, he was the strangest character. And yeah, he's like crazy. But that was Roy. But cleaning up after him was important. Making him stop was not important. The gospel in his life was important. And, we did have the privilege of leading Roy to Jesus before he died. But there's this place you have to find of how do we serve a person who's broken and making our job difficult, and then how do we clean up after so that other people aren't finding that as an obstacle. It's the navigating of all of the pieces of the messiness of our lives in the church. Because if we're going to actually reach lost people and engage them, and our people are going to serve alongside us to do it, they need to know why what they're doing makes a difference, and what difference that is, so that they can say, this is important, and that the Lord sees me in this. Because, I grew up in a context, and this was hard, the context that I grew up in. Our church was it was a blue-collar town, but the church was white-collar. That was big. And people like my dad really didn't have any place to serve or any value, because he was a blue collar guy who hadn't gone to university. And you know, he was a gifted guy who had the gift of giving and service, and you know, would give anybody the shirt off his back, and he did. He just did. And that was my dad. And yet, somehow in the church, if you didn't have a speaking role where you're the teacher, you're the upfront person, and you weren't, you know, coming as the businessman who now showed up at church, you weren't valued. And so that's what I grew up with. And my dad was not valued. And it wasn't until I became a church planter that my parents really fully engaged in ministry, because they came and joined me. And my parents, in their, I guess they would have been in their late 60s when that happened, they started to serve. And the first couple that I led to Christ were 67 years old. And somebody needed to disciple them. Well, a discipleship group started in my parents' basement, and it was one of the most effective groups in our whole church. And my mom and dad, turns out, were both teachers, but different than what was expected in the other church. My mother was never used in ministry. She was sidelined for, I don't know why, just because her close friends were very, very loud and vocal. But my mom, if she were able still, and she stood up teaching, the last time she did, okay, it was in a room with about 200 women. She stood up to teach, and that day she was telling her own story and some life lessons learned and things. In that room, they went through probably a dozen boxes of Kleenex that day, and lives were changed because she had something to offer, and nobody identified it until she was in her late 60s. And started to serve. And by that time, the last time she taught, she would have been in her 80s. And, you know, it just was amazing to see it. And there are too many people that we are leaving on the sidelines because they don't fit the mold. You know, this morning when Tim talked about the church, we have something to take seriously in that. It's great that we all have lots of education. And I mean, culture has changed, and education has changed and all of that. You can't get by without some more education than what my dad had. You know, my dad quit high school in grade 9. Still went to police college, because you could do that then. But he quit high school in grade 9. Well, you can't do that now and really succeed in life. So people do more. So we have more education. So there's a part of that. But there is also a piece where we are missing the regular people. And somehow we're not winning them to Christ. And we need to figure out ways to engage them in service in the church and win them more. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so would you advocate like creating new ministries so that people can serve? Because I mean, at our church we try anyway to employ. You know, we read Simple Church by Tom Rainer, and Dave Carter, who was presenting here, was our pastor at the time. He hired me on that kind of thing, and then, you know, we've been reading it a bit with the elders and so on. And I don't know if that philosophy would work with creating more ministries, just so that people can sort of have their own niche. But is there a middle ground? Like, how do we not get too complicated with our ministry?
Yeah, I think we need to be flexible and creative. I firmly believe that if God gives you people with specific gifts in your church, then he intends for you to use them. And so if you have people with a specific giftedness and you don't have a role for them, then you need to think about that. Where am I going to plug these people in? What are we going to do differently that we've never done before? Because for some reason, God has brought them together and they're part of his kingdom. If we're not using that, we've kind of missed the boat. And if we've got way too many musicians, like the church I talked about that had the people with master's degrees in music sitting in the pew and not serving, what's up with that? Why is that? Because the first church I pastored, they hired me because Tammy could play the piano. They didn't hire me because of me. They're like, oh yeah, we'll take him because we want her. and so she got me my first gig, and she was the only musician in the church. Now she taught a bunch of young girls how to play the piano, and boys, but those girls ended up playing the piano for the church after we left it. And so when we left, there was kids playing the piano, and the church had some musicians. But if a church has a whole pile of musicians, we need to be looking outside and saying, okay, well, what does God want us to do with this? Maybe there are churches nearby that need to be blessed. I had a pastor, one of our churches, say to me not long ago, we were really hurting, and I asked a couple of pastors if they could help with some musicians, and they never responded. And now, he didn't ask me, and he didn't ask at Feb Central, and I would have known who to ask. But he just left that and was really disappointed. Now, what he didn't know was those pastors that he asked were both hurting, and they were both in a really difficult spot. He didn't know it. But as a family, we could have helped, because I know that I could have made about 3 phone calls and had him probably 2 different worship teams cycling through to come and help him in his church. I just wonder if, as we look at the giftedness and the multifaceted things that happen in our churches, we need to be looking with different perspective and saying, what is it that God wants us to do? How is it going to be the evolving of the ministry of the church and engaging the community in serving the people of God in different ways that we maybe haven't done before? Because, yes, we gather and we do a worship service. Well, a lot of what we do on Sunday and a lot of the way that we do those things, it's not prescribed in the Bible like that. We've created it and we do it. Maybe we need to do something different to reach the culture and community that God's placed us, and that's why he's giving us people with those different giftings. So be creative. Think outside the box. Try and come up with some other ways to make the gospel available to people in all kinds of places. So that would be my encouragement on that. It's never simple. It's not easy, but there are ways. Any last questions? We've got a couple minutes.
I also have many, but I'm going to let other people.
Yep.
I'm just curious if you had I think it was a newcomers class, and then you went into the helping them figure out their unique fit. How many sessions would you typically do? Would that be like a one-off session?
That one was at least 2 sessions, the second one,
Yep.
because there was a lot in that I talked about, so I did that in 2 sessions. The first one was actually 5.
Okay.
The newcomer class
Yeah.
was 5 weeks. Actually, the last week was more teaching light and more just eating together and fellowship. But the other ones were all more of the teaching piece. But we did a lot of made sure they understood our doctrine, understood our vision and our mission for the church. And the other blessing of those newcomers classes is that you can bless people to join other churches. and I did that a lot. People will come, like one classic example, I had a couple come from Vancouver. And in those first 4 classes, they said, in our other church, at least 3 or 4 times every night. And I finally, in the last one, said, we are never going to be your other church. This is the mission and the vision that God has entrusted to us, and we're sticking with it. So I can give you the name, and I gave them a name of another church that was much more similar to where they were coming from, and I sent them on their way. Because they were going to be more of a pain to us than they were a blessing. And the kingdom wasn't going to shrink because they didn't come to our church. They went to somebody else's, and they were going to be a blessing there. And they were, but because they fit. But they were going to drive me nuts. And we weren't that. We weren't them. We just weren't. So, yeah.
How do you address membership that isn't serving, even though you encourage them to continue to serve the whole time?
Yeah, no, that's important. We always talk about it as this is what's expected of a member.
Right.
And so we just publicly talked about it that way. And then we would actually talk with people about how are you serving and what can we do to help you find a place to serve, and be honest about it. Because people didn't like it sometimes, and that's okay. They get uncomfortable, but that's part of discipleship. As leaders, sometimes out of fear of the way they're going to react, we don't say things, and we should. Because even though it's hard, it's in their best interest to grow past it, but it's not easy. And some of them, now frankly, sometimes those people are, power bases in the church, and those are hard. But when you have enough trust within your congregation, sometimes it's time to take those on. You have to do it. But yeah, it's hard. Not easy.
Can I sort of answer that a little bit? Because there was, in our church, coffee ministry is one where, I don't know why, but nobody, like when we put out an announcement to serve for coffee, nobody does it. And we get 60 cups of coffee drank every week. But so I started looking through our list of the members who weren't serving, and I would just call them and be like, hey, we have a spot open on the coffee team. And so I got 3 people to serve on the coffee team. They don't even drink coffee. But they all immediately said, okay. I find that you just gotta offer it.
Yeah, that's great. I remember I'll close with this. My first church, we had people, it was this is way back in the old days, because I am old. And we had people who were, definitely the 20/80 rule was working in our church really well. And I remember this one lady, a meeting that I had with her, where she looked at me with panic, because she knew it was nominating committee time. And it was back in the days when we had a nominating committee. And I showed up, and I said to her, this year, as a nominating committee, we're going to ask you to drop 6 things that you were doing. And that was way less than I wanted to ask. She was doing 15 different things in the church. And they were all significant. And I said, so this year I want you to drop 6. And she didn't know whether to be offended or to be happy at first, and eventually she was happy. But at first she was getting her head around, well, why don't you want me to do it? But she was overwhelmed. And so I was getting her to drop them, because unless there were vacancies, I couldn't fill them. And so, yeah, sometimes you just do that, and because other people have to do it. All right, well, thank you all for coming, and yes.
I'm just going to say there are some cultures too. We've just recently figured out that some cultures, they don't volunteer for things. They expect the pastor to ask them to do something.
Yeah, it's important to
and
be
you don't know
sensitive
unless
to that.
you know their
Yeah,
culture,
yeah,
right? Where
yeah.
they're coming from.
That's a good point. It's a good point. Well taken. Okay, thank you so much. Pray you have a blessed conference, and thanks for being patient with me.